Dear Latinos, being racist to other Latinos, indigenous, and black folks will not bring you any closer to the whiteness that you crave so much. And if this message bothers you, then it was probably meant for you.
I would be lying. I think a lot of us Latinos would be lying if we said that there was an anti-Blackness in our communities, because there is. There is this deeply rooted anti-Blackness.
Black people in Mexico were not even acknowledged until recent years.
Latinos racist against black people? Good question. So first of all, let me start by acknowledging that's the truth. And anyone that says otherwise is not helpful in this whole conversation.
Nothing can stop me from saying that there is a lot of colorism, racism, and self-hatred in Latin America. I'll stop preaching when lighter-skinned Latinos or even black Latinos who feel that they're white will stop speaking about people in Spanish in front of them because they're thinking that they don't know Spanish because they're black. I'll stop preaching when Latina mothers and grandmothers and aunts stop preaching about mejor la raza, to better your race by dating lighter-skinned people or somebody with more European features to deplete the blackness in the family. I'll stop preaching when me and my mother and my family stop getting treated a certain way because we black in Latin America. When we go to restaurants, airports, everywhere. A lot of y'all are black and in denial. Whether you look at it or not, you're black. Mulata, all of that, you're black.
I'm the dark kind of Mexican, obviously, right? So racism, obviously we grew up with that, right? Like we grew up knowing about it. I've always refused to be a victim or whatever. Nonetheless, I acknowledge that.
The best example of how anti-black the Latinx community can be and is that the Dominican Republic and Haiti is on the same island, but only the Dominican Republic is considered Latin America.
I always tell people the day the Latino, African American, Asian, and other communities realize that they share the same oppressor is the day we start winning.
Latinos are finally speaking out about something that has been swept under the rug for way too long, anti-Blackness in their own communities. For years, many were told to stay away from black folks, and now they are admitting where this mindset came from. So let us react to what they are saying and break it all down. And this is not just about one country. Latinos from all over are now opening up about how anti-Blackness has been deeply rooted in their own cultures for generations. From family members making comments about skin color to the entire communities pushing harmful stereotypes. It's a conversation that's been long overdue. So remember to like the video and tell me down there in the comment section what you think about this.
Dear Latinos, being racist to other Latinos, indigenous, and black folks will not bring you any closer to the whiteness that you crave so much. And if this message bothers you, then it was probably meant for you.
Don't matter about my post. Nothing can stop me from saying that there is a lot of colorism, racism, and self-hatred in Latin America. I'll stop preaching when lighter-skinned Latinos or even black Latinos who feel that they're white will stop speaking about people in Spanish in front of them because they're thinking that they don't know Spanish because they're black. I'll stop preaching when Latina mothers and grandmothers and aunts stop preaching about mejor la raza, to better your race by dating lighter-skinned people or somebody with more European features to deplete the blackness in the family. I'll stop preaching when me and my mother and my family stop getting treated a certain way because we black in Latin America. When we go to restaurants, airports, everywhere. A lot of y'all are black and in denial. Whether you look at it or not, you're black. Mulata, all of that, you're black.
So my parents call me Prieto. Prieto means dark. Or negro. Negro obviously means black. And that's literally what they call me, right? My cousins call me Negrito. And I guess in Mexico, it's so desensitized. But again, in Mexico, slavery was abolished way before the US. So maybe that's why it's not a thing. I don't know. Now, with that being said, I'm the dark kind of Mexican, obviously, right? So I'm actual brown, not peachy brown. I'm brown. It's now becoming a thing. More recently, I started hearing about colorism. Like colorism, this is the first year that I hear about it. I've never heard about it in my life. Racism, obviously we grew up with that, right? Like we grew up knowing about it. I've always refused to be a victim or whatever. Nonetheless, I acknowledge that it's a real thing, right? It exists. So in Mexico, the racism and colorism stuff isn't as apparent, but I guess it's a thing. I've never experienced it, but then again, I don't go to Mexico too often. Yeah, here in the US, I don't think people can call or have those nicknames for other people, especially if their actual color is not the same color, right? So I don't think a white person calls things to people, which is kind of weird. That in Mexico it is allowed. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. Are Mexicans racist? I don't think so. It comes from a place of love when they say those things. At least that's what I think. But let me know what you guys think.
The best example of how anti-Black the Latinx community can be and is that the Dominican Republic and Haiti is on the same island, but only the Dominican Republic is considered Latin America, to most people at least. Like, it's only been the past few years that I realized that since I'm Haitian American, I am also Afro-Latinx. In the way, it doesn't even sit right with me because I've never been considered that by the Latinx community is wild. Like, even on our island of Hispaniola, the anti-Blackness, the racism, the colorism is wild, and I don't know, like, it literally blows my mind.
Latinos racist against Black people? Good question. So first of all, let me start by acknowledging that's the truth. And anyone that says otherwise is not helpful in this whole conversation. Like white people saying, I don't see color. Secondly, race is just a construct that was invented by European people intended to divide us, which they successfully managed to do. And unfortunately, just like many other purposefully marginalized communities, we play along exactly into the narrative of letting them divide us. We all have that tío or abuelito or papa in our family that is racist, that is, has issues with Black people or Asian people, or is homophobic or transphobic. And most likely it's more family members than not. The issue is that it's really difficult to have these conversations. But we need to have these conversations with our own community. We need to call out, call in, and educate our own family members, our own friends. And too often I see Latinos stay silent. And they say, oh, that's just how he is. And yes, I use he a lot because it's a lot of times the man, at least in my experience. And if you live in LA, you probably know the scandal we recently had with the leaked audio. For me, the only scandal really was that so many Latinos that I know pretended that that's a surprise. Really? That's exactly like white people pretending that they're surprised that racism exists. There are so many issues in our Latino community, from being anti-Black to brown people calling themselves white. I mean, please identify as whatever you want, but it's weird. To light-skinned Latinos like myself, pretending that they have the same racism to deal with as a Black person. And then there is the whole other layer of not being Latino enough, not being Black enough, not being brown enough. It's like our community is so busy tearing each other down that we lost sight of who is actually doing the oppression here. I had a US-born friend here in LA whose both parents were Mexican, but she has never been to Mexico and she doesn't speak Spanish. And she told me that in her opinion, I wasn't really Mexican, which I thought was funny. And I immigrated as an adult. I'm not even first generation. I'm a Mexican immigrant in the United States. But to her, just because my mom was European, that was enough to tell me I wasn't actually Latina. And those are the same kind of people that pretend that all Latinos are brown and act like Afro-Latinos don't exist. It's time for all of us to unite because together we're not the minority. We are the majority if we just have each other's back.
Honestly, I'm so glad that you're asking this because I've been wanting to talk about this for a very long time, and I'll probably make a more detailed video in the future, but I would be lying. I think a lot of us Latinos would be lying if we said that there wasn't anti-Blackness in our communities, because there is. There is this deeply rooted anti-Blackness that I think has gotten better in recent years, but it certainly exists. And as someone whose brother-in-law is Black, whose nephews are Mexican-American Black, I can't tell you how angry and frustrated I am, and honestly just disappointed by the atrocities that I keep seeing today when it comes to anti-Blackness in Latino communities. And I can speak to specifically in Mexican communities. And just really quickly before I go to answer your question, what I find really sad is that when you look at history, the Latino community and the Black community have always helped each other out. You look at the abolition of slavery in Mexico, which happened only 8 years after Mexico gained its independence from Spain. and they were bringing slaves from the US through Texas into Mexico to grant them freedom. And this was particularly done because of President Vicente Guerrero, I believe. He was Afro-Latino, which, by the way, was one of the earlier presidents in Mexico. So how can we even forget that an Afro-Latino man was one of the earlier presidents of Mexico? You look at the Chicano movements of the 1960s and the 1970s, you had Black Panthers and Chicano activists coming together to fight for universal justice for their communities. You look at something as early as the Black Lives Matter movement, which I was in Arizona for. And let me tell you, I went marching and it was packed. And about 85 to 90%, I can confidently say, were Latinos. And they were hand in hand with their Black sisters and brothers. I tell you, it was beautiful. I mean, I'm getting literally chills. It just reminded me in that moment how we've been robbed, how our communities have been robbed from togetherness because we've been othered, not only by ourselves, but mainly by white supremacists. The devil works hard, but the white man works harder. And I say that because I think historically we've seen an implementation of divisive tactics rooted in fear against Latinos and the Black community to create a division. To answer this question, it's very multifaceted and it's very complex. Things like assimilation pressures that a lot of Latinos fall into, white supremacy, which Latinos can be a part of as well, don't lie, structural racism, I think they all play a part. But one of the things that I feel has really been the rooted problem in all of this is colonialism. I don't think a lot of people realize the effects of colonialism far after it ends. And I think Mexico is a prime example because when the Spanish colonized modern day Mexico in the 1500s and were there for 300 plus years, they created a caste system that literally judged people based on skin color. And that caste system didn't end when Mexico gained its independence. It didn't just go away. It then filtered through society, and it is very alive and well today. I mean, kind of a side note, but when you look at media representation in Mexico, it's very rarely people that look like me. It's people who are more Aryan looking, who are more white passing, that essentially get those leading roles that are in big TV shows. So that breathes within Mexico, and it certainly breathes within its people. It is brought over by US Latinos here who believe in that caste, who inadvertently judge from a place of colorism, and whether subconscious or not, this is ingrained in their worldview. So of course, it's something that they don't even think of unless you put yourself out of it, which is what a lot of us have done, right? You decenter yourself and take a step back and become aware of what is happening, of the colorism, of the long-term ramifications of this caste system, then you allow space and opportunity to break away from that structural racism that we all inherently are a part of. And it's happening, even though it's slow, it is happening. People are changing. I've seen it with my own family. I've seen it in other communities where we are decentering colorism and anti-Blackness from the foundation of how we look at the world because of our colonial past. So listen, I know that's not probably the best answer you want, but I do think that it is changing. And I do think that this is where it's more important than ever for us to come together and realize this so that we can be a unit, that we can help each other out instead of being more divided, because that's exactly why we're here today. Will there always be Latinos who are anti-Black? Absolutely. And unfortunately, they are always the loudest. They are the ones who are getting on interviews, on TV, and then it creates and pushes that narrative that we're talking about, that Latinos are all anti-Black. But I can assure you that there are a lot of us out there who are not. I can confidently tell you that. And it is a slow growth, but it is a growth nonetheless.
Black people in Mexico were not even acknowledged until recent years. Their presence was not acknowledged by the government up until very recent years. But yet, they have been there since days of slavery. You understand? So, since the days of slavery, a lot of the slaves in North America, in the United States, a lot of the slaves ran to Mexico to hide. And a lot of them have been living there. And not only that, but a lot of these Spaniards, they brought some slaves to Mexico too. So black people have been in Mexico for hundreds of years. But Mexican government has not acknowledged their presence until very recent years. And that is why I made a video and called it Afro-Mexican, because these people have been there for many years with their own communities, speaking Spanish of course, but they acknowledge their African ancestry. They acknowledge it. That's why they self-identify as Afro-Mexican, because they're acknowledging their African roots. And the government has not bothered with them. When you watch telenovela, Spanish telenovela, have you ever seen a black man? No, never. But yet, black people have been there since the Europeans have been there.
Wow, it is honestly refreshing to see Latinos openly admitting this. Because for so long, people acted like anti-Blackness wasn't a thing in Latino communities. But the truth is, it's been there for generations. It's just that now, more people are finally acknowledging it. And that's the first step to change. See what they're saying here is exactly what black people have been pointing out for years. In many Latin American countries, anti-Blackness isn't just personal. It's deeply embedded in the culture, in the media, in families. It's the idea that lighter skin is better, that straight hair is a good hair, and that having African ancestry is something to be hidden, instead of embraced. And where did this come from? Colonization. The same European powers that enslaved black people in the US also did it across Latin America. And just like in the US, they created a racial hierarchy where blackness was placed at the bottom. That mentality didn't just disappear, it was passed down for generations. And it's not just history, this still plays out today. Look at how black Latinos are treated in their own countries. In many places, they are erased from the history, ignored in the media, and even discriminated against in their own communities. You have Afro-Latinos who are constantly told don't look Latino just because they don't fit the Europeanized image people expect. And let's not forget how this mindset affects how Latinos interact with African people outside their communities. Many were straight up told to avoid black folks, to not date them, to not trust them. And it wasn't because of personal experience, it was because of the generational fear and misinformation that was never challenged. What's happening now is that the younger generations are starting to wake up. They are questioning the things they were told as kids. They are realizing that just because Abuela or Tio said something about black people doesn't mean it was true. And social media has played a huge role in this. Now Latinos are hearing directly from black people, from Afro-Latinos, from historians who are breaking down the lies they were told. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That's why videos like this are very important, because change starts with awareness. And here is the real question. Who benefits from the division between black and Latino communities? Because it's definitely not us. Keeping black and brown people divided only benefits the systems that oppress them. It stops people from uniting against the real issues: racism, discrimination, and economic inequality. That's why so many of black folks are saying enough is enough. Black and Latino solidarity is powerful. And that's exactly why these old racist narratives were pushed so hard. To keep us from realizing that we actually have more in common than we've been told. So I respect the fact that these Latinos are admitting the truth and having this conversation. It's not easy to unlearn something that's been deeply ingrained in your culture. But this is how change happens, by acknowledging the past, challenging harmful ideas, and making sure that the next generation doesn't grow up with the same mindset. What do you all think? Have you seen this kind of anti-Blackness in Latino communities? Let me know in the comments and let's keep this conversation going. And this is Mr. TA signing off. Ciao.